More people defect from Gaddafi's side to the side of the anti-Gaddafi rebels, that is going to be what might decide the outcome one way or the other.
All right, Shadi, thank you very much indeed for your assessment there. Let's just go back to Cairo, Tahrir Square, and talk to our correspondent, Ayman Mohyeddin. Ayman, we were talking to you earlier. You were saying the crowd was waiting expectantly for the country's new Prime Minister, Essam Sharaf. Just talk our viewers through what we're seeing on our screens now.
Absolutely. In fact, what you're seeing right there is in the center of your frame, in that light gray jacket, that is Dr. Essam Sharaf, the new Prime Minister of Egypt. Just about a few minutes ago, he was hoisted by military police. You can probably see the dozens of red beret soldiers that are around him. Those were the individuals that put him on the stage, and essentially he addressed the crowd, raised his hand, and thousands of people that have gathered here erupted in applause. Now, he's actually continuing his statements, but you can see the crowd, they're just very overwhelmed by the fact that they are being spoken to by the Prime Minister. In fact, he's having a hard time beginning his speech. What is so iconic about this image, what is so historic, is that immediately adjacent to him is a senior member of the Muslim Brotherhood, Dr. Mohammed Beltagi. Now, that image would have been impossible to imagine just a few weeks ago, that a senior member of the Muslim Brotherhood standing side by side with the current Prime Minister of Egypt, addressing thousands of people. And you can imagine that the crowd of people that are all gathered here, you can see them all reaching up, trying to take pictures of the comments of the Prime Minister as he addresses the crowd. Indeed, it is a very historic moment. I mean,
as you say, very historic in terms of Essam Sharaf there, and standing next to a member of the Muslim Brotherhood. But I mean, how significant is his appearance in the square, and what message is the transitional government trying to send here by having him come down to the square on Friday after prayers?
Well, there are a few very important developments that are significant about his presence here. One, he himself was actually a protester before he was even asked to form this cabinet, before he even stepped into this role. He himself attended many of the protests here, in fact, well before President Hosni Mubarak stepped down. As a former transport minister back in 2004 through 2006, he was a very well-respected individual, a technocrat whose term in office, though very short-lived because it was only 2 years, earned him quite a great deal of credit with Egyptians, because once he left office, he became very critical of the regime and criticized the government for not being visionaries and investing in the infrastructure of Egypt. So throughout the past several years, he had developed quite a following as an independent voice, a critical voice of the government. And in fact, as we understand the developments of this last week, what ended up happening when the Supreme Council was under immense pressure to replace the outgoing Prime Minister Ahmed Shafiq, who resigned yesterday, they asked the members of the coalition who represented the revolutionary January 25th movement, well, which individuals would you like to see become Prime Minister? And on top of that short list was the name Dr. Essam Sharaf. He was a consensus candidate who had the support of a lot of the political forces of Egypt. The fact that he himself was seen in Tahrir Square earned him a lot of credibility among ordinary Egyptians. That is why today he has come back and is addressing the crowd. And there was some speculation that, in fact, he wanted to take his oath of office here in front of the protesters. Right now, it's certainly a very historic fact that a Prime Minister is addressing the crowd.
Ayman, as we're looking at these live pictures here now coming in from Tahrir Square, what sort of broad-based support does Essam Sharaf have within the opposition? You say it's ironic and significant, very significant, that he's standing next to a senior member of the Muslim Brotherhood, but what's his broad-based support within the wider opposition?
Well, when you look at how his name came into being and those organizations that called for him, you definitely get a sense that he is a very widely respected individual by all of Egypt's political forces. You know, as we were saying earlier, when the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces was under immense pressure to force Ahmed Shafiq and others from his cabinet that were closely aligned with President Hosni Mubarak to step down, they came to the Coalition of Revolutionary Movements, which is a loose coalition that represents both the young and the newly established, or perhaps the more traditional political parties here in Egypt. They asked him who's an individual that all of you would agree on. And that name that came up from all of these groups was Dr. Assam Sharaf. Now, when we talk about the coalition of these movements, it does include the traditional parties, the WAF. It includes more of the newcomers to the political arena here, including Dr. Mohammed al-Baradi and his National Association of Change. And more importantly, it includes Egypt's youth movements, which are a little bit less organized, but nonetheless very vocal. And his name was the name that most of these political forces agreed upon because of his credibility and his track record. So he is returning to a square where he himself enjoys a great deal of popularity. It really underscores how important Tahrir Square has become for Egypt, because what has emerged now is that even the politicians that have come here, as you were saying, a senior member of the Muslim Brotherhood, as well as now the new Prime Minister, the fact that they have come to the heart of Tahrir Square to address the crowd, it really gives you a sense of just how important this square is symbolically and now more importantly functionally to the political arena in Egypt.
Ayman, let's just signpost for our viewers if they're just joining us here on Al Jazeera. These are live pictures coming in from Tahrir Square. Thousands of people again have converged on the square to hear the country's new Prime Minister, Essam Sharaf, who's waiting to speak to the crowds. They're not coming down yet to hear what he has to say, but as Ayman Mohyeddin, our correspondent, was saying, they're very significant because he's standing shoulder to shoulder with a senior member of the Muslim Brotherhood. But I think we can now just listen in to what Essam Sharif, Egypt's new Prime Minister, has to say.
If you allow me, please, as I've said, please, you have achieved a great task, and the bigger objective is to rebuild Egypt. Please listen to me. I'm praying to God that I would see Egypt a free country where opinion is not captured in prison cells, and see that the security of the citizen is a top priority, and that the security apparatus works for the good of the citizens. And at the end, I would like to say that please, if you allow me, there are lots of demands that we are working on, but I would like to end my speech. I pray to God that may Almighty God has honored me with this with more than I have asked for, and I pray to God to help me to be able to deserve this position. Please raise your hands up, raise your head up. You are an Egyptian. Raise your head up, you're an Egyptian.
So a very short but passionate speech there from Essam Sharif, the new Egyptian Prime Minister, addressing expectant